Before we get started with our panel, though, we want to introduce Vincent Reyna with the Penn Housing Initiative to help us kind of paint a picture of the state of housing in the city of Philadelphia. Dr. Reyna is Associate Professor of Urban Economics and Planning, Faculty Director of the Housing Initiative at Penn, and Editor-in-Chief of Housing Policy Debate. And I know Dr. Reyna is here, so we'll have him come up and say a few words before we get to our panel.
Hey everyone, how you doing? So my name is Vincent Reyna. I'm on the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm the founding director of the Housing Initiative at Penn. What we do, yes, directly in. There we go. All right, maybe I'll hold it because it's a little low. And I'm the founding director of the Housing Initiative at Penn. And what we do is essentially independent research assessing the impact of housing and housing interventions on a broad set of outcomes. We also partner with policymakers, cities, states, nonprofits to essentially develop housing solutions. So for example, in 2018, I partnered with LISC to write the City of Philadelphia's first ever housing action plan. We've done research on home repair program. You may have heard of our study on the BSRP program and impacts on crime, finding that BSRP investments reduced crime by 22% for each home and had an escalating effect per home that you actually invested in. You might have also seen our reports during the pandemic where we actually surveyed property owners across the country and actually particularly in Philadelphia to understand the challenges that you were facing with your properties during the pandemic. Challenges around issues of non-payment, challenges around deferred maintenance, challenges around accessing financing. We released a report on that was heavily covered and actually also considered by the city for policy directives as well. I'll just add here that I'm returning to Penn after nearly 2 years at the White House, where I was the senior advisor for housing and urban policy at the White House Domestic Policy Council. I'm here clearly speaking in my personal capacity, not on behalf of the White House or the president in any way, shape, or form, which is actually quite liberating. So I don't need to tell you about the housing market in Philadelphia, right? You live it. But what I wanted to do is offer kind of three overarching facts, essentially, or a few overarching facts that I think are important for kind of guiding our conversation. So there's this group called Up for Growth. They're a pro-development group saying we need to essentially increase the supply of housing nationally. And by their estimates, there's an underproduction of over 90,000 units of housing in Philadelphia alone, right? So that means there's 90,000 fewer housing units being produced than needed. And what that does is put a lot of pressure on the existing housing stock, right? Particularly on rents in the existing housing stock. One of the ways we see that very actively in a report we just did for PHFA, we found that there are over 100,000 households in Philadelphia renter households below 30% of AMI. Yet there are only 50,000 rental units in Philadelphia affordable to households at that income level, right? So just by that math alone, there is just insufficient supply in our city broadly, but specifically a lot of an insufficient supply of affordable housing in the city. So, I mean, what this does is it puts a lot of pressure on households across a broad set of spectrums. And what this does is also put a broad set of pressures on our resources, right? As you know, Philadelphia, while resources have grown for housing in recent years, particularly post the development of that housing plan, they're still insufficient. There are 5 times as many households who qualify for a Section 8 voucher in Philadelphia than there are actual vouchers on the ground right now, right? That's a staggering number, right? And that's a staggering number, to be honest, that the city alone can't address. So at the White House, I had the tremendous privilege of essentially advising the senior advisors and the president on a broad set of housing solutions, right? One of the things we did was release the first ever White House Housing Supply Action Plan. We released a whole host of action on renter protections, on advancing homeownership, and we've seen a whole kind of slew of programs come out along the way. And one of the things that's interesting is clearly I had to kind of keep my arm's length, but not surprisingly, thanks to a lot of the leaders here today and throughout the city and the state, we saw a lot of those resources hit the ground in Pennsylvania specifically, right? So Nikhil Saval, who's here today, Senator Saval, who's my senator from my district, he worked tirelessly with other reps from the state and other elected officials to develop the whole home repair program, which you know very well. What the whole home repair program did is it actually leveraged unprecedented flexibilities being offered by Treasury through state and local fiscal recovery funds to create a program that was addressing much needed housing repair needs across the state, right? We know we're a very old city. We also know we're in a very old state. And so home repairs is one of the primary challenges facing the city and state of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, respectively. And so seeing innovative solutions like whole home repairs was a really kind of creative use of federal resources, and particularly one-time federal resources. This administration had created the Pro Housing Program from HUD. What it was an $80 million program that was essentially created a competition across municipalities to apply for funds that they can then use to essentially reduce local land use and zoning barriers and reduce regulatory burden to increase the supply of housing. Philadelphia was actually one of the first jurisdictions to receive those funds. So again, speaking to the innovation that we are seeing in Philadelphia and the reality that, you know, with resources, the city and state can actually do some really exciting things, right? Beyond that, I will just say that something I've had the honor to work on, not in my White House capacity at all, but in my capacity as a HIP director, is working with the city of Philadelphia to develop the PHL Housing Plus program, which is essentially a form of direct rental assistance to tenants that's meant to essentially help bridge their housing cost burdens. So it's a complement to the Section 8 voucher program, and it was a whole new program that was created. There's currently 300 households in the program. We're studying it right now through a randomized control trial where we're comparing outcomes of those households versus households receiving cash versus those households who are receiving no assistance, all of whom we recruited from the Section 8 wait list rather than kind of recruiting on their own to apply for a program that we knew would be oversubscribed. And we're looking at the impact of this program on household outcomes. So a program like that is tremendously innovative and has the potential to have large impact. But again, is something that we definitely need to see scaled kind of going forward. So coming back to my initial prompt, right? We have a housing supply challenge in the city of Philadelphia. This is not specific to Philadelphia. This is a nationwide phenomenon, right? We're seeing it across the state. We're seeing it across the country. This is particularly affecting the lowest income households, right? And the reality is, as you know well, there's insufficient local resources. And to be honest, at this point, federal resources, but for approval of some of the proposals that have been forwarded to Congress to actually address these challenges. There are a lot of bright spots, local innovation that we've seen at the local level. There's increased programs like the Rental Improvement Fund from the city of Philadelphia and things along those lines. But clearly, there's a lot of needs that go beyond what the resources have at hand. We had a housing affordability crisis before the pandemic. We saw rents go up nationally by 26% between 2021 and 2023, right? And we've essentially reached this crisis moment. We've reached this crisis moment where not only is housing unaffordable, but also our housing stock is deteriorating and in need of investment. And we need the resources to actually address that. So given the challenges at hand that we're seeing, this is a great opportunity to hear from our wonderful elected leaders about the solutions that we're seeing at the local level, at the state level. And hopefully we could kind of take the collective thoughts here, I would say, to kind of push this conversation to the national level. There's a lot of really amazing proposals on the table. The first ever proposal for a Section 8 guarantee for extremely low-income veterans in our country, right? The idea that there's so many veterans being exposed to homelessness who qualify for rental assistance, who can't access it, right? This is kind of common sense policy, right? That will both help those households, but also help our development process, right? As you know, Section 8 vouchers could be leveraged potentially for financing if it was a secure form of financing, right? If you knew that you could rely on that rental stream of income to actually go to the bank and leverage that for a loan and things along those lines. There's a lot of real opportunity to meet the challenges. And so I'm very excited to hear the panel ahead where those are going to be discussed. So thank you for having me. Thank you for answering our surveys as property owners. understanding your challenges and needs is actually a really important research question, policy question, and a means for policy action. And I hope I have the opportunity in my research capacity and practice capacity to engage with you further. So thanks for having me here today.
Probably easier to hold this anyway. Thank you, Dr. Reyna. And with that, we are going to begin our panel discussion. And what I'd like to do is ask our elected officials to come up here and take a seat as we plan to spend the next hour plus chatting with them. And we're really glad they are here. And what I'll do is I'll kind of do a quick bio with each of them, starting with Councilmember Rue Landau, civil rights attorney, has spent her career fighting for social justice. Prior to being elected to office, she worked at Community Legal Services and directed the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations and Fair Housing Commission. Since joining City Council, she's championed affordable housing, consumer protection, outdoor dining, and the city's arts and culture sectors. State Senator Nikhil Saval is a father, husband, writer, and organizer representing Pennsylvania's 1st Senatorial District. He serves as Democratic chair of the Senate's Urban Affairs and Housing Committee and chair of the Senate's Philadelphia delegation. He led the creation of Pennsylvania's nationally acclaimed Whole Home Repairs Program, which establishes a one-stop shop for home repairs and weatherization. Senator Saval has written extensively for the New York Times and the New Yorker. He's written several books as well, and we're glad he's here. And State Representative Morgan Cephas, chairwoman of the Philadelphia House Delegation, a lifelong public servant and West Philadelphia native. Her priorities include expanding access to health care to improve health outcomes, increasing educational opportunities and career pipelines for youth and young adults, and creating jobs through business incentives. She sits on various boards and commissions and successfully secured over $25 million to improve community development projects in her district. So again, thank you all for being here. The goal here is to just kind of get the conversation going, as we say, to bridge the gap with a list of questions our elected officials have already seen in advance. And our hope here is to get to most, if not all, of those questions. There may be some questions that seem to be more city related than state. And if that's the case, our elected officials, you don't necessarily have to jump in if you don't have anything to add, okay? That's perfectly fine. To the audience, we ask, of course, that you be respectful. We will not be taking questions during this part of the discussion, but if you do have a question, you were provided a pen and paper. We encourage you to write down that question. Someone will be around at some point to collect those pieces of paper. And then depending on the time remaining, we certainly hope to get to a few of those questions. We also have HAPCO Philadelphia General Counsel Paul Cohen here, to kind of throw in any thoughts that he has, and he has plenty of them, I know. So he'll jump in as he sees fit as well. So with that, these questions came from the board, and we're just going to get to as many of them. We're going to cover a lot of topics here. And topic number one is lead paint. Lead paint regulations are vitally important for public health. Since the new lead laws were passed, what benefits have you seen, and do you think it may put too much of an immediate financial burden on landlords, on housing providers? We haven't really established an order, so the question is about lead paint, and whoever wants to take a stab at that first.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. I'm going to start because this is a mostly city question, and unfortunately, my colleague, Councilmember Jamie Gaudier couldn't be here today, but just so you know, to give a little background, she's the chair of our housing committee, and I am the vice chair. So we do a lot of work hand in hand together. And again, for all of us, thank you for having us. We're really happy to be here. We appreciate the forum, and really appreciate any of the conversations we have after the forum as well. When you call us at our offices. We do have a lead paint law in Philadelphia, as you all know, and there's been a lot of pluses to it, right? We now know where there's lead paint, and so we've got fewer young people who are being poisoned by lead paint, which is great news. Another plus that came from it is there was, for those of us who care very deeply about making sure that landlords have licenses, so we know who the landlord is, how to reach them in case there's an emergency. a variety of other things. We found there was many properties that weren't licensed, so we got them licensed. That's great news. And I understand that there's a cost associated with the lead paint test, but it is a small swipe test. And it was also a way to have landlords have kind of a new side hustle on some level. Landlords and property management companies were able to do the swipe tests, and we're able to, have that happen as quickly as possible. So lots of positives. I understand there is a cost associated with it. I understand it is seen to some of you as a burden, but again, you can't offset the health and safety of our young people and our houses for that. So appreciate all that you have, all that you do to make sure that that happens properly.
Yeah. So again, I'm State Representative Morgan Cephas, and welcome to my legislative district. Thank you for choosing St. Joe's University. I think I would add, we've seen a significant reduction in exposure to lead in our young people based on recent studies that have been done on the state. We've literally seen rates of lead cut in half as a result of the work that the city has done, that the state has done, that you have done as landlords. I know it's difficult to, absolutely want to balance the health of your tenants, the health of your housing stock, while also addressing, the extreme costs that it takes to ensure that lead is removed from the homes that you all are renting. I think, one of the things that we prioritize as the Philadelphia delegation is to ensure that we are finding resources that are available to support you in, addressing some of the, initiatives that, we're requiring you to do. We want to make sure that we're not just creating unfunded mandates. And, one of the projects I had the ability to work on was partnering with a local nonprofit called Achievability in the southern part of my district, where there's a significant level of lead exposure. We were able to find them a grant to partner up with landlords, to partner up with private homeowners to help them offset the cost of, remediating the lead in the homes, but also to provide the much needed repairs that, were needed in an effort to ensure that tenants were, stayed healthy. So I think that is the role. And I know oftentimes we're asking, what role can government play? How can we be partners, given the significant role that you play in the city of Philadelphia? We know that 46% of our housed population are renters. So we have to work collaboratively together to ensure that we're creating policies, providing resources that you need so you can thrive. So we don't have large New York companies coming in and buying up the city of Philadelphia. So we do have to work hand in hand in addressing these critical issues. And one of the ways that we're able to do it is providing funding in our state budget every year to do lead removal from our school buildings, from our housing stock. As the gentleman stated, in my district, majority of the housing stock was built before 1970, similar to the entire city of Philadelphia. So these challenges are real. We understand that there is an associated cost, and that's when we have the opportunity to have discussions like this and work together to ensure that we're getting you what you need, because essentially you're housing our constituents. So I want to make sure that that is the role that we're playing at the state level to ensure that we're having the balanced conversation. So we're not putting health versus addressing the cost that it takes to keep your homes and rental units safe.
Thank you. I don't want to add too much more, but one, just it's a pleasure to be here, a genuine pleasure to be here with my state colleague and with my council colleague and neighbor. As it happens, we live in South Philly.
It's my senator.
We should
My
always.
senator too.
We always fail to carpool to these events. One thing that the state representative brought up, that Rep. Cephas brought up, which is the importance of resources for landlords. I mean, let's be clear. I think we I'd say all three of us care very deeply about affordable housing. We care very deeply about increasing the stock of affordable housing and indeed housing more generally. But we also know that affordable rental housing is, in fact, a lot of it is your housing, right? It's the housing that's unsubsidized, but affordable to tenants across the city of Philadelphia and indeed across the Commonwealth. And there have been so many challenges that that threaten to put that housing out of reach, repairs, et cetera. And, lead abatement can be one of them. Let's be clear that there is no safe exposure to lead. So it is really critical. There's just it has to be done for the sake of our children. It's an environmental justice issue. It's a child health issue. It's something that we absolutely need to attend to. We'll probably discuss this, a few more times, but in the whole home repairs legislation that we were able to get adopted, my colleague in the state legislature, much of the discussion about the program has been about the homeowner supports, but there is the funding is also there for, at least in statute, for small landlords. That is, landlords who have a maximum of 15 properties over no more than 5 homes. The way it operates is it operates in the form of a forgivable loan that after a certain period, as long as you maintain a certain level of affordability in your apartments, you can make needed repairs up to $50,000. Various places have done this differently. The Rental Improvement Fund, that Dr. Reyna brought up, is an example of how that's working in Philadelphia, but that's meant to provide supports for landlords to make, lead abatement, of course, is one of them, but also just, other forms of efficiency and health and habitability repairs, so that, you can keep your tenants, keep your homes, without having to, raise costs. And I think that's really critical. So I think that's an interesting example of the sorts of resources that I think at a city and Commonwealth level, we're trying to deliver to ensure that we maintain the affordability of our housing stock.
Paul Cohen.
Thank you. Paul Cohen, General Counsel for HAPCO. First, I want to thank the panel for coming out today. I know it's not the easiest thing to do to speak to a somewhat hostile crowd. As I try to tell everybody, though, that the biggest advocates for tenants are landlords. Landlords love tenants, right? They're your customers. We love tenants. We advocate for tenants. Where we have a problem is with bad tenants. That's a problem. And honestly, there's bad landlords that are out there. And we have a problem with bad landlords because, quite frankly, bad landlords make it difficult for the good landlords. So we're against bad landlords as well. So we're, I think, on the same page. It's a matter of trying to figure out how we can craft legislation that works to just target the bad tenant and target the bad landlord. So I think we can work together. I think with regard to lead, we can all agree that lead is a problem. Okay, and lead needs to be taken care of. And the legislation, I'm not going to get into the details of the legislation. We've argued that for years now. Not going to go backwards. We're at a point where we're at now where every single unit has to be tested for lead before the property is rented. One of the problems that we're still experiencing, though, that I think we can address together, is that the penalty, if the landlord doesn't comply, and complying means that the landlord has the test done and gives a copy to the tenant, has the tenant sign that they've received it. If that's not done, then the tenant at some point in the future not only doesn't have to pay the rent, but can get an abatement of the rent, meaning all the rent that they paid since the beginning of the lease, they can now sue to get that money back. It's one of the few laws that provides for an abatement, a rebate, a taking back of that rent that's already been paid. So for instance, with the certificate of rental suitability, if that's not complied with, tenant sues, tenant doesn't have to pay the ongoing rent until the landlord takes care of that and gets their certificate, but the tenant doesn't get an abatement of rent. The tenant doesn't get that money back. With the lead, the tenant gets the money back. So you can have a situation where the landlord, it could be lead free. There's no lead in the property. It's lead safe. There isn't a lead problem, but just because the landlord didn't comply with the technical requirements of the law, the tenant can sue and get all that money back. It's created a cottage industry of attorneys that now see that they can get money by suing landlords for this back money to get it back when the landlord hasn't complied. So one of the things I would say is if we could fix that penalty piece of this, that would go a long way. And the penalty piece would only not kick in if the landlord didn't have a lead problem. There are so many requirements in the city of Philadelphia. I wrote a book, it's this thick, on all the things that a landlord has to do to comply with the laws in the city of Philadelphia. Okay? And I thought that when I wrote the book that I had covered them all, and I'm still discovering new ones that I didn't even know existed that the landlord has to comply with. As a new landlord, as a small landlord, someone that just buys a property, they inherited a property, they're not aware of all the things that they need to do to comply. We, as HAPCO and as an organization, we try to educate our members on what they need to do. We try to get the word out to landlords, but we can't get to them all. The same way that tenants, it's very difficult to get the tenants to tell them what their rights are. It's difficult to get the landlords as well. So one of the things that I think is low-hanging fruit that we could possibly resolve is to not have that abatement of rent where there was no actual lead paint problem. So I get you want to have a stick there to try to force the landlords to do this, but what you're doing is you're snarling landlords that aren't aware of that this is one of the requirements that they have to do.
Okay. We're going to take questions afterward. Okay. You can write them down and we'll include them. Okay. Let's move on to the next question. And since we're talking about money, and Senator Saval had mentioned about financial incentives for property owners, I want to talk next topic here about taxes. Many property owners have seen an increase in their tax assessments, for some quite a dramatic increase. Can anything be done to help the average property owner offset this increase? Specifically, we're talking about landlords here who are then not inclined to just pass the cost on to tenants.
Good. Hi again, everybody. So this is a really big issue for me. And I highlighted it immediately. I've only been in office since January. And it was one of the things that I actually talked about on the campaign trail throughout the city of Philadelphia. We have protections for homeowners who live in the home, so owner-occupied units, where in many instances, in certain instances, your taxes would not increase because you live there. But there are not the same protections if, for example, you have a property where you've had a long-term low-income tenant, you don't want to even pass on the property tax increase, but your house gets assessed at much higher, and suddenly you bear the burden of paying those taxes, or you're going to pass it on to the tenant that you didn't even want to evict or pass it on to them. So unfortunately, what I've uncovered is we have a problem that my colleagues try to help us with every year, which is the uniformity clause in Pennsylvania. And we are not allowed to do this in the simple way that I want to take care of the problem. I'm currently working on it. I'm getting very close to introducing something that will help to and offset this to some degree for landlords, but it was not as simple as I wanted it to be because you couldn't treat landlords differently under the uniformity clause of Pennsylvania. I'm still thinking all the time, trust me, it's a really big issue for me. I think that you have long-term tenants who've been living in neighborhoods. You've got really good landlords who want to keep them there. I've heard time and time again from landlord tenant 101 workshops that I've done in neighborhoods, up at Temple and various other parts of the city where they say, I've lived here for 30 years and now my landlord's taxes are going up and I can't stay here any longer. And that's just unacceptable. And I promise you, I'm going to work as hard as I can to keep trying to figure out other ways to take care of this. And stay tuned, because I think you'll see something that you like. But it's a problem that hopefully we can get a state solution on at some point.
There is legislation that we've passed at a state level. It was our colleague Jared Solomon in the House called, I think it's House Bill 581, I want to say, but we can check this. But, it was in part to allow for abatements for tax abatements for affordable housing for property owners and single family homeowners across the city of Philadelphia. It was only adopted then by council in a very small section of the city, but it still has the potential to be expanded. I mean, it is Commonwealth wide, but it could be expanded to the entire city. And so, this would merit further conversation. But I think that was a really exceptional bill. It was extremely bipartisan, and we hope that could ease some burdens, not specifically with the assessment issue, but with just overall taxes.
And I forgot to add one thing. I'm sorry. I also just introduced a resolution calling on the city to extend the deadlines by which you could get a first level review and also file an appeal for when they will accept your appeal for your property tax assessments. And we've asked the city to go as far as March 31st, 2025, when they will accept your appeals for your property taxes. And we've had verbal agreement that they are very willing to give people much more time.
Just so everyone knows, if that isn't agreed to, the extension that you have until October the 7th
That's true.
to file your appeal. So note that on your calendar.
Mhm.
Okay, let's talk about rent control. Rent control and rent stabilization is a big topic, of course, nationwide. What are your thoughts on it? Should it ever be considered in Philadelphia?
I'll start with this one, if that's all right. So let's just take stock of the kind of situation under which rent stabilization or control is being considered, just or at least talked about. It's it's not necessarily been adopted in that many places, but in recent years, what the U.S. Census survey revealed last week that 49.7% of renters in the U.S. are cost burdened, right? Which means that they pay over 30% of their income on rent. Housing costs have increased in 44 out of the top 50 U.S. metros beyond the pace of wage increases. So we have half the country, half the number of the percentage of renters is paying way too much than they should be paying in rent. And of course, there are a lot of, we can sort of account for the rise in costs. But one thing is, wages not keeping pace with housing costs, and the like. And so it's under those circumstances that I think things like rent stabilization or control, and there really are quite a number of varieties that exist, not just in the United States historically and currently, but internationally. But California statewide has a kind of cap with, I believe, allows for a 7% increase every year. Oregon has something to that effect as well. Obviously there are rent stabilization laws in the books in New York City. There's a bill in the Pennsylvania Senate that by my colleagues, Senators Capoletti, who represents Montgomery County, and Senator Dillon, who represents Northeast Philadelphia, which is focused on larger landlords and price increases and capping price increases below, above 10, not going above 10%, let's say. And I think the city of Boston recently instituted something to this effect as well. But usually these things, one of the things that people are concerned about with rent control or stabilization is, of course, the repairs issue, which we've been talking about. How do we account for the cost of housing, upkeep, maintenance, et cetera, which is a real issue, as we've been discussing. And then also, does it stymie the production of new housing? And most of these pieces of legislation, I can't speak for each one, exempt new construction to one degree or another, or they actually don't apply to many of the landlords maybe in this room. They apply to larger landlords and commercial property owners, and things like that. And so if we're trying to keep people in their homes and we want to ensure that we have stable tenants and not have people at risk of eviction, of course, which is happening due to the increasing cost burden nature of tenants, it becomes a tool that I think is one tool. That said, the major source of I think the cost burden is the supply issue, and so ultimately, I think we should be considering a tool of this kind in the context of an overall supply crisis. I'm a co-sponsor of legislation that is fully bipartisan in the Senate, truly across the ideological spectrum, that would make it easier to build more housing in more places in Pennsylvania, specifically by allowing accessory dwelling units by right in most places, allowing, depending on population size, the erection of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, the reform of minimum lot sizes, you're allowed to build more easily, and I feel like there's another provision that I'm missing, but basically, this is a kind of comprehensive zoning bill, and it will take time. Not everyone is, there are also versions, elements of this that I know have come out of the House or been considered in the House. But that, I think, is the overall context in which we need to consider, what, if any, forms of sort of like, stabilization policies need to be considered. How do we ensure the increase in the supply, and how do we ensure that housing is affordable, and we ensure that landlords and small property owners are still able to get the resources they need to make repairs, maintenance, et cetera, and keep their properties as affordable.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, just to that question, the conversation is already happening. And you see in multiple states, as my colleague, Senator Saval mentioned, that are already have stabilization policies in place to, address this rising crisis. And I think here in Pennsylvania, we need to start having the conversation. So, our governor just signed an executive order the other day, which is the first for Pennsylvania. He's going to develop an action plan that is looked to be implemented over the next 5 years. And it's going to deal with increasing affordable housing as well as addressing homelessness. And I think the conversation is naturally going to come up at that table. And I think HAPCO and its members should be a part of that discussion to ensure that, again, we're balancing both priorities, right? That we're not, creating more homelessness or pricing people out of their homes, because that inevitably has an impact on landlords, because if you don't have the tenant, you can't essentially afford to maintain your property. But we also want to ensure that you all have properties to rent, because I will continuously say, I do not want to see out-of-state landlords coming to buy up Philadelphia's housing stock. And when you see, when you see the president even talking about policies that would be capping rents at no more than 5%, if you're interested in any of the governmental incentives, naturally the conversation is already happening. And I think it would be prudent of us to get ahead of the discussion and work on it collaboratively. So again, we're keeping people housed, but also not, forcing you all to sell to the highest bidder. Because again, that is not what we want to see. So I think we need to, get out in front of this conversation and really hone in what can a model look like in Pennsylvania that will have everybody thrive and not create winners and losers.
Paul, anything to add?
Always. I'm not going to debate the pros and cons of rent control. That's out there. The economists have weighed in on it, and I think we all sort of have seen all the data on it. I would say this, though. Being a landlord is being in business. You're in the business of landlording. And as a landlord, you have a choice. You can own property in Pennsylvania. You can own property in Philadelphia. Or you can go to some other state and own property. And what we're seeing already is, because of all the regulations, especially in Philadelphia, that a lot of your landlords have left the business. And when you talk about out-of-towners coming in and buying the property up, that's happening. That's happening across the board. And the buzzword that gets landlords riled up more than any other word, or two words, is rent control. And if rent control comes to Philadelphia and or Pennsylvania, what you're going to see, many people in this room and many landlords are going to decide being a landlord doesn't make sense for them anymore. And they're going to sell their properties. And if you talk to landlords, large landlords across the country, they're scared of rent control coming to Philadelphia. They don't want to buy in Philadelphia. They don't want to own properties in Philadelphia. They don't want to build in Philadelphia because they're afraid rent control is coming to Philadelphia. Just last month, I spoke to a landlord that was looking to invest in Philadelphia, and I went down all the different possibilities with rent control. And they looked at it all and they said, you know what? We're not taking a chance. It's not worth the risk to us. By the way, I told them about all the other regulations in that book that they have to comply with. At some point, I understand the needs for the tenant. We all do. And we understand the needs for affordable housing, but that has to be balanced against what's going to happen. Just even mentioning the word rent control, 2 words, rent control, creates a major problem for landlords. So just want to make sure that you're aware of that when you discuss it.
Well, I think I have the perfect follow-up question then on affordable housing. As Representative Cephas had mentioned, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro did this in Philadelphia, right? He signed that executive order to create a housing action plan. You mentioned a little bit about what that is, but the bigger picture, the lack of affordable housing is a problem in the city of Philadelphia. You have a very attentive audience here of many housing providers. What then, after hearing from Paul, what would be your best pitch to landlords to invest in themselves and invest in the city?
I'm a big fan of small business owners, and that's exactly what I see you guys as. And we in Philadelphia want to support you in every way we can in order to make sure that you are able to, expand your business, be good landlords. I know there's some rules. There's definitely some rules, but guess what? There's rules for every business in the city of Philadelphia. And if you follow them, you can have really, as you know, really good relationships with your tenants for really long times. Been doing this for a very, very long time. And I've spoken to many landlords who've had super strong relationships with their tenants. In fact, I saw one who said in 10 years is the first time I've ever been to municipal court, for example. I also, another landlord I spoke to, she helps her tenants. She's been trying to get out of the business a little bit just because she's moving on in something else in life. And she has been helping her tenants build up their income, their wealth, get their credit checks done right. And she's selling the properties to them. She's getting them off of Section 8 and getting them. Yeah. I mean, it's really, you can do this, and you can, there's plenty of things. And this is what we want to support. We want folks who can be homeowners. Let's help you get into let's help them get into programs to do that. And let's find ways that we can support you as much as possible. But you are absolutely essential to Philadelphia. I cannot, I absolutely want to repeat what my colleagues are saying. We want you here. We do not want the big out-of-town landlords where it's all commercial and nobody knows each other, and it's, you're just a number and you're automatically doing things in each other's bank accounts. We want you guys here because you're the real people. First, you are Philadelphians and we care about you and we want you to have good, thriving businesses. And 2, we want to keep up the relationships with the landlords and the tenants. And so we'll do what we can to make that happen. As far as affordability throughout the city, it's, let's be honest, no matter how high and expensive things are, we're still less expensive than some of our neighboring areas. That's a pretty scary thought, right? Because it is becoming unaffordable to many, many people. The 25-year-old, the 30-year-old who's got a decent job. This is not what we want in Philadelphia. We want to take care of our folks. We want to give them good jobs that pay a lot of money, and help make sure that they can keep roofs over their heads and stay in Philly. That's what we want. It's the only. Pass along.
I echo everything that my colleague said. I think like I said before, the housing that the unsubsidized rental housing that you all as small, I think small business is the right word. My parents were small business owners. They ran a pizza restaurant. I mean, understand the kind of thin margins, the headwinds that, you know, are just unpredictable, including a global pandemic that have made things so much harder. You know, a lot of the work for the small landlord portion of whole home repairs was really motivated by what Rep. Cephas was saying, is that we saw so many people selling their properties in no small part, because of just the combined effect of deferred maintenance and the costs and difficulties associated with it. And we wanted, at least in part, to mitigate that and make it easier for people to keep their homes. There's just so much that is gained by those homes and small and you know, apartments staying home and staying close to home, and those relationships being established between landlords and tenants. I mean, we've described them. That's critical to, and is critical to the kind of ethos and feel of Philadelphia. You know, likewise, I just want to make sure that we consider the growth of the city. I mean, I think we all want the city to grow, right? We want everyone to stay here, and we want people to raise children in Philadelphia, move to Philadelphia. And you know, I think part of that is also accommodating that growth. And so again, I'm a big proponent of ensuring that we're able to, you know, sustainably and you know, increase the supply of housing in Philadelphia. One thing I would point, you know, attention to is, among those, you know, challenges, besides, you know, restrictions on where and how you can build, are what we will be a rash of expiring affordable homes, you know, like the low-income housing tax credit homes, where the affordability restrictions are coming due. We're going to lose a lot of affordable housing over the next few years. We actually, to some degree, don't even know how much, because there isn't stable accounting for this across the Commonwealth. And there is, you know, and so that's something we need to get a hold of. But I think there are opportunities there if we can figure out how not to lose a single affordable unit. But, you know, many of these units they were developed in places that are now thriving. Maybe they're affordable units in high growth or high opportunity neighborhoods with good schools. And maybe these are places where we can assist as the Commonwealth or the city, you know, using perhaps a fund or some kind of entity to take properties that are at risk of losing their affordable housing, maintaining them, but allowing, you know, additional development on these properties, right? I mean, I think these are things where then you would actually you can increase the rate of market housing, but then also just, you know, maintain the affordability of those existing properties. We have actually, you know, things that could do things like that. The Accelerator Fund is a great thing in Philadelphia. There's, you know, there are ways that we can ensure that we don't lose affordable housing. Again, I think we should be increasing its availability and increasing the overall availability of market rate housing generally, because we're short so many units, as I think the governor mentioned the other day, and I think we all know. So that's my sort of pitch for the future of at least of the city, but I think beyond that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that I truly believe in this moment, Philadelphia is really going through a revitalization period.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of where you stand on the Sixer Stadium, is not reached the state, so I don't have to make a position. But it really reflects the viability of our city in companies actually wanting to invest and wanting to expand. So from you know, that interest to the hydrogen hub that we've recently been able to get, to a significant other investments that's happening in the city of Philadelphia, with us being a bioscience hub, a biotech hub, where we're talking the average income is roughly around 75 to 100,000. We just did a partnership with Google and Community College of Philadelphia, where the average salary, again, is going to be 75,000 when they come out of school. So, I mean, you have individuals that are finding and have jobs at these higher incomes. Additionally, like my colleague said, we sit between Washington and DC. We are less than a 2-hour ride either which way. So we are truly becoming a destination for so many individuals in the city of Philadelphia, because we are relatively cheaper. And with all of these, you know, investments that are coming, when we were talking about 2026, imagine, you know, renting your place out during the FIFA game. I mean, we are, you know, going to be on the map over the next several years. And I think the one pitch that I would make is investing in the housing stock here in the city of Philadelphia and providing those rental units. I think you'll see the return on it because of the level of investments and the revitalization period that we are going through in the city of Philadelphia. And you also see it with the generational shifts. You see Mayor Kinney would always talk about residents, once they started having, they would come to Philadelphia, they would start having a family, but then they would move out to the suburbs because they couldn't access, a quality education readily available in their neighborhood. But once they then become empty nesters, they then would move back into the city of Philadelphia. So you have that generation that is now coming back into our city. You also have the Gen Zers who, I don't know why they don't believe in home ownership, but they are looking to be renters. And, with, again, us being a population where 46% of our population are renters. And I do foresee that, growing because we are eds and meds here in the city of Philadelphia. I think it's just prime time to invest in early because, again, we are seeing those population trends in the city of Philadelphia, and we're seeing those investments coming into the city. That makes us more attractive.
I just have two additional things that the city has done for landlords, which is great.
Ooh,
One is, I'm gonna
it's a
make sure
good
everyone's
moment,
aware.
Paul
Yes,
Cohen. I
that
like
is a good
this. Come on now.
One is the Gateway program, which the city has done a really good job on it. They're still working on it, but it is a great resource for everybody. The Gateway program is a computer where the city has pretty much put all the different computer systems into one website. We can go on that website, and from that website, you can get to any department, which is great that the city's actually put that all together. It was a great effort by the city. It took a little while, but they did get it done. It's a Gateway, gateway.com, right? Thank you.
Landlord Gateway at phila.gov.
Landlord Gateway, all one word, at phila.gov.
I just have the icon.
Again, if you didn't catch that, landlord gateway at phila.gov.
And the other thing I wanted to mention is that PHA has increased the rents that they're paying, which it has been a tremendous help for landlords. Historically, the rents were lower than market rent. Actually, now a lot of the rents are higher than market rent. So there's a great opportunity for everybody if you want to get into housing choice vouchers and start working with PHA. They pay the rent. It's guaranteed. There's a lot of advantages to it. The biggest disadvantage forever was that the rents were low. But the city is now, through PHA, I guess it's the federal government has done it. They've increased the rents so that it's now something that is doable.
Hold on. I got you.
You can just Google Landlord Gateway. It'll come up for you.
Oh, good.
Everything I speak about Landlord Gateway, go right up.
Yeah, if you just, I've been on there many times. If you just Google it, but it's also, that information is on our website at hapcophiladelphia.com. Well, why don't we keep with that topic a little bit of city services for landlords? And here's a good question. This may be more for for Councilmember Landau. PGW, with the help of HAPCO, set up the Landlord Cooperation Program, LCP, which notifies landlords when PGW has a service or collections issue at the property. What are your thoughts on setting up something like that with the water department?
Fully. I'm the new kid, so I will tell you, fully open to talking about it. I didn't know this was a potential issue until I got these questions, so thank you. I'm very, very proud of the city with its new low-income water payment plan program that it has. It's kind of a first in the nation, and many, this is helping so many people reduce their bills. But I'm fully open to talking more about it, and don't have enough information at the moment to go further.
Yeah, it took us years to get the program through PGW, but that's worked out really well. So I think it's something that we could just move over to the water department. I'm sure it'll take years to go through the water department as well, but it might be worth starting the conversation. If we could, that'd be great. And the program I think you were referring to was the TAP program?
The TAP program, the water
For
TAP
the-
program.
Yeah, so my one suggestion to everybody is it's very difficult to go through all the forms that you have to fill out
Mm.
as a tenant in the TAP program. So my suggestion to landlords is fill the forms out for the tenant.
Mm.
Make it nice and easy for them, because if you're going to rely on them to do it, they're most likely not going to do it. Do it for them, give it to them where they just have to review it and sign the documents, and you can send it in for them. It's a great program, the TAP, TAP.
Okay, this is what I'm calling the tough question portion of the program. Next question is on eviction. The eviction diversion program is aimed at keeping tenants in their homes, which is both important and admirable, but it can have the unintended consequence of keeping non-paying tenants in a unit for several extra months at the landlord's expense. Do you think the eviction diversion program needs tweaking, and where do you see it going from here?
I'll start. I'm really proud of our eviction diversion program. I actually think it's, I would tell you, I know this is not going to be popular responses, but I'm going for it. I was a legal aid lawyer for 10 years. I was in landlord tenant court 3 to 5 days a week. I dealt in every court at every level because I represented mostly subsidized housing tenants. And I also then ran the Fair Housing Commission for 12 years. I've got to tell you what I saw over and over and over again, where that landlords and tenants, and I'm not saying it's you, so please hear this. I just want you to know, but I saw many times landlords and tenants didn't talk to each other, didn't try to resolve anything, and there was no connection with them before they went to court. I could tell you from the Fair Housing Commission level, it was so frustrating. Even if a tenant was complaining about repairs, even got to the point of withholding their rent, by the time we had to get a hearing together, get commissioners together, get people sitting there, a landlord would say, oh, I want to do the repairs, but I can't get into the property. I'm like, we just spent all this time just doing all of this. We need to do a little bit of conversation ahead of time. So I know it's not the most popular program in this room, but I would say that there's a lot of positives that come from landlords and tenants touching base on the phone, talking to each other, where a tenant also gets a housing counselor, and there's a mediator on the phone to even just have you talk to each other. You know, the municipal court, when there were 24,000 evictions, did not work very quickly. I know that. I could easily come in, a landlord said I didn't get in a property, I'd get a continuance for 30 plus days. We know the system didn't work very fast to begin with. And I know that we are, at about 60 days now. It was 6 weeks, I think, but is now at about 60 days. And I, we'll look into this on both the eviction diversion side and the municipal court side, because I still have a lot of contacts there. But I really do think that this initial touch is a good thing. The initial communication is a good thing. I'll tell you what the great thing is, the rental assistance that Councilmember Jamie Gaudier and I made sure to get, and various other council members made sure to get more money into the pot this year to make sure that the landlords are helping to get paid when the tenants are falling behind. So we've created the eviction diversion program is permanent now. We voted on it. It's not going anywhere. I'm open to hearing tweaks from you guys of things that can be changed. But what my goal is to continue to get rental assistance money in the pot. Can't wait for all of the home repair programs to get money flowing quicker and faster down to landlords. I just got put on the PHDC board. So basic systems repairs and all of that, I'm starting to dig in. We want to get as much funding to you and also to help the tenants as possible, as quickly as possible. And, we got the touch. So I think it's good. And now I'll pass it along.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, legislation all the time needs tweaks. I mean, everything is always evolving. I had the pleasure of being staff to Councilman Curtis Jones Jr. when he moved the mortgage foreclosure diversion program that also became a national model. And, as we all know, housing is a real crisis, but again, we have to balance the interests. And I think as you're talking about tweaks to the program, is there potentially a thought to create an emergency fund specifically for landlords while they wait it out with the mediation? Is that potentially an opportunity? And I think as we look to ensure that, again, you maintain those properties, but also allowing dignity for the tenant, how are we utilizing and leveraging dollars, not just on the city level, but state and federal level, to ensure that you do have bills to pay. You have to maintain the repairs. The bank's not giving you, any type of furlough, and we don't want you to have to take out loans because you got to pay back the interest. So that could potentially be an additional solution to create that emergency fund, similar to how they have for tenants, and create it for landlords while you all are going through that mediation period. So that potentially could also be a solution. But I think it's an opportunity to look at best practices across the country to see, again, how we balance those two interests.
It's, I find it an incredibly interesting model. The thing I would add is, I mean, at the Commonwealth level, it was critical to have it, once the kind of models came into view, to have rental assistance. That was something that we fought for. I mean, I was elected in 2020. I was sworn in 2021. Virtually the first thing I did about 2 weeks later was amend the authorizing legislation for new rental assistance money, to ensure that money that wasn't spent in other counties came to counties that were spending the money, which largely was Philadelphia. So I think we were able to get 50 million more that came to Philly that wasn't spent. And that was my first piece of legislation, was that amendment. And so despite the reputation of being a champion for tenants that I'm very proud of, I've been fighting for landlords basically the entire time. And so that I think is critical. But the other thing I would consider in this context, and it may be I'm not a lawyer, but it may be helpful in speeding up the process, is when you have, of course, eviction filed against you in anywhere in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you get a record, and so even though you may actually find through mediation that that you don't end up in a judgment, the landlord recoups the back rent or whatever happens to be the issue, it then becomes much harder for that tenant to find housing. And by the same token, it's difficult for landlords who use common screening services to distinguish between good and bad tenants. So we should really consider, there's legislation at the state level and in both our chambers. I'm proud to be the main sponsor of the Senate version for several years, to create fair records. And that creates, we're very proud that it creates no additional burdens on landlords. It frankly just cleans up the data at the court level. And I think that also might have an effect in terms of, were we to be able to get that adopted, have an effect on the overall eviction diversion program.
Paul?
Thank you. Okay. So when a tenant doesn't pay the rent, and it's a good landlord, a landlord that's in this room, this is what generally happens. The landlord contacts the tenant, and they try to work with the tenant, right? Is that what you all do? Right? So the first thing the tenant says, I lost my job, I got a hard time, my car broke down, I got some kind of problem, will you work with me? Okay? Small landlord, they work with their tenants. They have no choice but to work with the tenant. The last thing that you all want to do is evict the tenant. You want the tenant to pay. You want to work with them to get them to pay. So you listen to their stories. They're your friends in a lot of instances. They shouldn't be, but because it's a business, but that's the way you treat your tenants. I know. I've talked to you all. I know what goes on, and it's admirable. But what ends up happening is next month goes by and they still can't pay the rent, and they give you another story, or they give you a couple dollars and you say, okay, I'll let it go for another month. And then it finally gets to the point where you have no choice. It's the last thing that you want to do. That's the normal scenario for a good landlord. And I understand, council member, I still have a hard time calling you council member. It's not the bad landlord. Yeah, they want to file right away because they know they got problems at the property. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And that's a lot of the cases that you would deal with over at Community Legal Services. But what happens with a good landlord, they've spent months trying to work with this tenant, and now the tenant is so far behind, they won't qualify for tenant financial assistance, which is why I try to teach all landlords, before the tenant owes over $3,500, you have to file with the diversion program. It's the only way you're going to be able to get the financial assistance. And we thank you so much.
Extra money.
Again, for the money, that was amazing. The tenant financial assistance, that's a wonderful program. It's great. And diversion works with tenant financial assistance. It's when there's no tenant financial assistance and you have landlords that are good landlords trying to work with the tenants, and now it's months have gone by and now the tenant's not paying and now they're going to lose another month in rent. That creates a problem. So we could somehow figure out how to deal with that. And the senator's suggestion, or I guess the representative's suggestion on having a fund to cover the landlord for that 30 days. I forget which one he said it. From the state. Would be a great thing. And it seems like there's enough money in the tenant financial assistance to be able to pay the landlord for that 30 days. So if the landlord ultimately loses that 30 days of rent, to be able to reimburse the landlord for that money, that would be wonderful.
And I would just add that it would be maybe a no interest loan. So until you just get paid back, not a grant that you would just get and that would be it.
That's interesting.
Well,
But it's worth a conversation,
Sure.
is the point that I'm making.
yes, we look forward to talking.
Okay.
Okay, along those same lines, let's talk about the landlord-tenant office. With the landlord-tenant office being eliminated, how do you see the process playing out with the sheriff? Could this lead, I think we're seeing it, to a backlog in eviction cases? And how can the system be improved?
So we had a system that was not regulated. There was no transparency. We've had some significant violence, including the shooting of Angel Davis. It was something that council had been looking at for a long time, long before I got there. And, council decided that that was enough. So there are now a series of regulations and trainings that have to happen for anybody who's going to be the landlord tenant officer. And we are in that situation right now. It's looking at who is going to take over the evictions. It might be the sheriff's office. And I think, we'll see where this goes. There's, that's all I have. I mean, the last I know is that Marissa Shooter, who was doing was the last Philadelphia landlord tenant officer, couldn't get the insurance that she needed in order to continue along with her business. And we have the sheriff's office that is willing to take it on, but they're just starting a whole lot of other things. They hadn't been doing tax sales in a while, and they do evictions. The sheriff's office has always done evictions for actions in ejectment that go to the Court of Common Pleas. So this is not something they've never done before. This would just increase the volume on the work they do, and they already have a significant amount of training for their officers. So hire more. That's where I honestly, when we talk about so much that we're talking about today of whether, a little bit of it's L&I, Department of Housing and Community Development, every place that we want things to move along faster, the city is still so understaffed. It's unbelievable. There's a 30% vacancy rate of staff, employees. And, I'll just put it out there, to be honest with you, as far as all of the employees I keep hearing from over and over again, going back to being in the office 5 days a week did not help anything. So I think they're still struggling to fill positions. And, some people would say you fill the positions first and then start negotiating when people have to go back in the office 5 days a week. But we did it the opposite way in Philadelphia.
It is just worth observing, just again from our perspective, that Philadelphia is an outlier in the way that it outsourced. its evictions and ejectments and things like that. And so we, to that end, I mean, it was other counties use a more accountable system. And so, I think there are concerns that I think that, council members raised that I think we share, speaking for myself, but I think we likely share. And in terms of what the capacity is of, another office to do it. But I think it was an outlier, had been raised for several years. And we did have, several episodes of really terrible violence. And so.
Yeah, I mean, again, Angela Davis was just not the only incident.
Mhm.
And, when it's a one-off like that, you can blame possibly a rogue officer.
Mhm.
But when there's multiple stories coming out of the city of Philadelphia, and we were uniquely situated to have this structure, it's something that you have to address. And there needs to be an entity that has transparency, that is held accountable. And I think it's going to, work with everybody to ensure that evictions are carried out safely and with dignity. We know evictions oftentimes are some of the most worst moments of an individual's life. But we also know that you got to be held accountable for, lack of rent payment. But there is a way that we can do so, again, with dignity and in a safe way. Because what the challenge for us in the city, representing the city of Philadelphia up in Harrisburg, is like we are dealing with hardcore Republicans up in Harrisburg that want us to manage our affairs. And when they're reading things like this in the paper, it makes it hard for us to champion investments, champion legislation and policies that will move us in the right direction. And, luckily we were able to get a bill out of the House of Representatives. It was House Bill 287 that was sponsored by my colleague, Representative Krajewski, Ronnie Green. I was also a co-sponsor, to ensure that, again, we put those type of operations in the hands of people that are going to be responsible, because there should never be a situation where, an individual, even though during one of the worst moments of their lives being evicted, has to go through that level of violence. It's just not okay. And it's something that we can collectively work on. And I do, again, encourage that. When I was a staffer in Councilman Jones's office, we worked with HAPCO all the time. I passed a bill that you didn't necessarily like, but at the very least, we were open for a conversation. And I think as we move down this road, it's not going to be perfect, obviously, on the onset, but at the very least, it's worth a conversation, because those type of incidents are just unexcusable.
Yes, we didn't like the good cause.
Oh, you remember?
Oh yeah. I just want to say a couple of things. I don't want to get into the merits of the landlord-tenant officer. They're not going to be here anymore, so that's pretty much water under the bridge. I do want to mention, however, that there was 2 incidences in 50 years, and I would suggest looking at those incidents and what actually happened in those incidents. And I can tell you that with the sheriff's office, I was just sent a video from one of my clients, and I can't share it, it's private, with the sheriff and what went on with the sheriff, and it would make you cringe on what happened in an eviction. That would never have happened with the landlord-tenant officer. And my fear is that you're going to see a lot of stuff happening with the sheriff, because the sheriff's not going to put up with stuff that the tenants are doing. And I can show you the video. Well, I can't show you the video, but there's a video that's out there. And that's just one incident that I'm aware of, where the sheriff's doing things that, in my opinion, the sheriff shouldn't have been doing, that the landlord-tenant officer never would have. But that's all done. But here's my concern and my curiosity. There's a state law that says that it's an archaic law, that says that the president judge of municipal court can appoint a landlord-tenant officer. That's a state law. Then the city now came along and passed an ordinance which says that for someone to do evictions, to be an eviction officer, here's the criteria that they have to comply with. So the question I have, and I can't get the answer to this, is, is there a preemption with regard to the city's ordinance? Or if you comply with the city ordinance and you get licensed as an eviction officer, do you still have to get appointed by the president judge in accordance with the state law? So there's two like competing laws out there that I can't get clarity on.
I think the answer to, so I could be, this bears merits further questioning, but just somewhat speculatively, like I think the answer to your last question, I think is still yes. I think the president judge still has to, but I could, because our legislation that we had in the Senate was to make it so that it couldn't be a private, it had to be, it would have to be a public official. But I think that law hasn't passed, to be clear. And I mean, there's a version of it that passed in the House, but it's not law. So but we can get,
Yeah,
get
and,
that.
and the other thing I would say is that if a bill actually does get passed through the Senate and the House and gets signed by the governor, that somehow the landlord-tenant officer, the private landlord-tenant officer, or however they're termed, would be working under color of state law, so that governmental tort immunity would apply to them, so that the insurance would then become reasonable. Because what happened with the landlord-tenant officer, it was a private individual that could be sued individually, and that's why, and having gotten sued, their insurance went through the roof. Whereas if they had that governmental tort immunity, not to get too technical about it, but government entities can't get sued. There's limited exceptions to it, but as a general rule, you can't sue a governmental entity. So when the sheriff's doing an eviction, in theory, you can't sue the sheriff's department if they do something wrong. Okay, so if that private individual could get that same protection, where could the bill would say that they would be working under, and the key word is that under color of state of color of the law, then they would have the governmental tort immunity, and they could get insurance and it would be reasonable, and then we could get more officers out there.
Can I just add 2 cents that I think that most importantly, what I think we all want, all landlords and all tenants want, for the time when an eviction is necessary, for it to be carried out in a peaceful, nonviolent, most respectful way possible, both to the tenants and their families and also to your property, right? And so that just came with a lot of things that didn't exist before. You would want to give some notice to the tenant, letting them know, hey, by the way, Friday is the day. There's no more time. This is it. Time's up. But then they'll have their stuff. For me, as I can tell you the horror stories of tenants who had their medications locked in their houses, who were having mental health crises in front of me. I'm like a first-year lawyer. There was so many ways in which we can make this, make this bad situation as easy as possible for all of us. And again, it does saves your property. They get their things out. I know what it takes sometimes for you. Now that the locks are changed and you've got all their belongings in there, including animals sometimes for God knows how long. Like, let's try to figure out a way in which we can make this the best, most transparent process that works for everybody. And not everyone's going to be happy all the time, but let's, we'll see what we can do to make this the best process possible.
Okay, we have about 30 minutes to go. I was asked at 7:30 to make a couple quick announcements, just to give our officials a couple minutes of a breather here. So I'll do that right now. First, by a show of hands, how many HAPCO members are here? If you're a member. Excellent. Non-members? Invited as well. Okay. This is our effort to try to get you to become a member. It is inexpensive, but it helps to fund these events. So if you'd like to do that, all you have to do is step outside. So that was number one. Number two, we wanted to let you know that HAPCO has been meeting with the Committee of 70, which is a group that is focused on government reform and accountability. We've been passing out some flyers here to help basically raise awareness of how their work impacts housing policies and landlords. So if you got one of those flyers, that is why. And then finally, we wanted to mention that the next big event, we have another one planned for the spring, still in the planning stages here, but it's an in-depth panel discussion with local tenant advocates coming together with landlords for a discussion. It should be a good one. We're looking to do that this spring. Landlords, of course, want good, capable, cooperative tenants, and tenants, of course, want safe, affordable, and quality rental units for their families. So we think bringing both of these groups together is important, and we anticipate it will draw our elected officials here as well as some media attention. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there for something we're planning in the spring. All right, that was the breather. Few more questions, and then we'll have time a little bit. I don't want to, I promise you we're not going to run late here. Few last questions. We recently did a podcast last month on squatters, which was kind of eye-opening with some real horror stories. Squatters can be a big problem for landlords around the country. What do you think can be done to help speed up the time it takes to remove a squatter? I will say, by the way, if you didn't see that podcast, you can see it on the website. It runs about 30 minutes and some interesting stories.
So this is not going to be a kind of a full answer to this question, but just more to kind of, again, as a kind of framing. I mean, like, I think the kind of increase, or what seems to be, when we'd have to like kind of measure it, the increase in people in squatting and people taking possession of homes that seem to be unoccupied, is just an overall facet of the kind of housing crisis that we're discussing, right? And so we need to ensure that we've talked about, I think, some of the measures here that would limit that, the kind of extent of that housing crisis, whether that's on the supply side or kind of a landlord-tenant issue. We need to, I think that's kind of the major source of this. But I don't want to pretend to speak, truly, not to like the particulars of the squatting issue, but I just want to frame it.
Yeah, so there's actually legislation being offered up in Harrisburg now by my colleague, Martina White, who's up out of the Northeast, which works to try to define what a squatter is, but also to require landlords to sign an affidavit acknowledging that they are not actual tenants in the property, and essentially handing it over to our local police department to remove the individual from the actual property. But we also know, again, I'm all about balance. We also know that there are a significant number of tenants that have, non-traditional agreements with their landlord. There's a significant number, I think it's close to like 20 to 30% of tenants that actually don't have formal leasing agreements. So we just have to ensure that those type of verbal agreements are being acknowledged and not used as a tool to remove a tenant with a bad actor that we might experience across the city of Philadelphia. I know in my district there's a series of rooming houses where landlords are renting rooms to tenants, and they are in a verbal agreement. And we just want to ensure that hypothetically someone has a bad day, or again a bad actor isn't taking advantage of a verbal agreement and is able to call the police and just get them removed quickly. So again, the bill hasn't come through committee, but it is a conversation that my colleague, Representative White, and also my colleague, Darisha Parker, are working on to kind of try to find the best road forward. Because again, it is an issue that, I experienced in my own district. I represent here, obviously, but also a section called Overbrook Park, where we had a squatter move in and literally damaged the property, almost, burnt down the home, which impacted, the homeowner next door. And it was very difficult to get the individual out. So, and again, there's bad actors when it comes to tenants, bad actors when it comes to landlords. Again, we just have to find a balance to ensure that we're protecting everybody's interests. So that is a bill, again, being considered up in Harrisburg by both my colleague, Representative White, and Representative Parker. I also know City Councilman Curtis Jones, I think, has a squatter bill.
There was
in
one
City
in
Council.
2018 that was
Okay.
never passed into law.
Is it David O?
Yeah, it was David O.
Okay.
Yes, it was.
Oh, I thought it was a guy. Okay.
I forgot to jog my memory, actually. And I apologize for not mentioning this earlier. I'm the chair of the Urban Affairs, or Democratic chair of the Urban Affairs and Housing Committee, and we just moved a version of the very bill, the Senate version of that bill, by Dan Laughlin, who's a senator in Erie, which is meant to exactly define, have a clear definition. And it does actually, there was an amendment that we were able to work on to kind of address the, so we should follow up, but address the kind of non-traditional agreements, and that passed, through our chamber. It passed in a bipartisan fashion. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
Great.
and I think unanimously, ultimately,
Great.
in the chamber. I could be quite wrong about that, but yeah. So neither I think is law, and so there is opportunity to engage on that.
But I mean, if it's done in a bipartisan way, particularly if you have Senator Saval voting for it, then we know it's a good bill.
Right.
And it's a good and a responsible bill, but also ensures that we address the problem, because again, it is a problem, throughout many different neighborhoods. I think in my district, I have close to a 60-70% homeowner district. And, squatters have become a problem. And, we have to find a way to, again, address it, but doing it with dignity, but also ensuring that you all aren't penalized as a result of someone breaking in your home.
I just want to add, as somebody who, one more thing?
No.
Okay. I remember listening to the hearings in in city council in 2018. There's two issues. One is defining who's a squatter, and I think that's where it is very complicated, because there are lots of folks who have a legal interest in the property in some way. And then the second thing is figuring out who removes them and how do you get removed, right? So we do have a system in Philadelphia. You can file an action in Jackman in the Court of Common Pleas. I'm sure Paul Cohen has told you all about it. I think HAPCO can help support you on that. So there's a process. Is it as fast as municipal court? No, it is not. It is, it takes a while through the Court of Common Pleas, and we can talk about that as well. There are ways in which to get expedited hearings for emergency basis, figure out how to file an injunction, how to get it done quickly. And I'm happy to talk more and work on that for cases that are clear squatters. But there is the gray area in between for the folks who are not squatters, who we want to make sure that there is a clear system and there's rules for this. And so I'm happy to continue talking to Paul to see if there's a way that we can make this move along faster.
If you can add it, that'd be great. I can't. Okay. So the actual bill that we're referencing went to the governor's desk.
Oh,
Yeah.
shit.
So
Wow,
that's why I
This-
figured, let me look it up first.
amazing.
But yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we can provide is, additional information as to what it does, and make sure that the city of Philadelphia is aware of it so they can enforce immediately.
Yeah, so first I want to thank you for passing that bill. That's awesome. Second thing I want to mention to everybody is that there's a procedure through the police department to deal with squatters. The challenge is getting the police to understand that this is what they need to do. So if you look on the HAPCO website, there's a police directive that's on there under the squatters listing. Read that police directive, and if you do have a squatter situation, follow it. Call the police, have them come out, show them that directive. If they won't act, then you can get a supervisor involved, and then hopefully that supervisor will come out, and there's a procedure for dealing with that squatter. It's in limited circumstances. We'd love to see a larger bill happen at some point in time. But for now, that's your best bet for dealing with squatters. But you need to act quickly. So if your property is vacant or you're concerned that there might be a squatter in there, make sure that you're going to the property repeatedly to see that there's nobody in the property. And if you do find someone in there, call the police right away.
And if you want to look up the language for the bill or have recommendations on how to improve it, it's Senate Bill 1236.
Okay, two more questions we have, and then we'll take a few questions before we wrap up. The next one is on licensing. A lot of people are confused by the need to have a vacant property license. Again, this may be a city-related question. Can you explain the purpose of a vacant property license?
I can. I'm supposed to go to another event. And I'm loving this so much. I can't leave. You know, there's a lot of reasons why the city of Philadelphia wants to know who owns a property and how to get in touch with people. And that's basically the answer here. If there's a hazard, if there's a fire, if there's a flood, if another building is falling down on it, we need to know who you are. And let's be honest, you own property. We wouldn't mind your taxes even for the vacant land. So that's the whole reason for the vacant property license.
Okay, and we'll jump into this last one then. As a stakeholder in landlord-tenant issues, what advice do you have on how property owners can get more involved with their government?
I mean, well, this, I will say, I think this is an incredible forum and opportunity, but I think organization, one, we of course, I think each of us deals directly with, because with our constituency, with constituents around particular property issues routinely, and one, we have like, a sort of a knowledge in each of our offices of the working things that are available to you, as small property owners, and then also, but, in terms of just resources, but also politically, it's just of interest to us, right? As we're talking about all of these issues, we want to have the concerns reflected so that the bills function in a way that makes landlords and tenants whole. That's by all, in all of our interests to ensure the growth of our city and sustainability of it. So I do think it's important to be organized. I think it is important to have organizations of this kind, that can coalesce and adjudicate, particular issues so that we can negotiate appropriately. But I think what we're doing here is great, but also I think I can speak for each of us that we all welcome kind of individual outreach and meeting with our offices. And I think, to get a stronger and finer sense of the issues going forward, because we care so deeply about the future of housing in our city and in our Commonwealth that, it's critical to have as rich an understanding as possible.
And you all played a significant role, I think, during the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, I want to say while we were in Harrisburg negotiating, financial tools to help support, homeowners, to help support tenants, there wasn't originally a conversation as to how are we helping and protecting landlords that are renting to tenants that are losing, their jobs and not able to pay their rent. And as a direct result, we created a program where the dollars would go directly to the landlord, and the tenant then would have to sign up to get the resources versus just it going directly to the tenant. Because there were some concerns, not our concerns, but across the aisle, that tenants weren't going to use the dollars to pay their rent. So there was that conversation to provide the payments directly to the landlords. Now, I know we did still have some challenges with capping the amount of rent that would be applied. I think it was like $750 it ended, or like $950. But I mean, it still was a conversation that was driven by landlords and understanding what was happening on the ground that forced us to move in that direction when it came to our financial support during that difficult time. So there's topics like that that are constantly coming up that impacts your line of business. Like one of the issues that we're going to be prioritizing when we go back to Harrisburg is the reauthorization of Chapter 14, which is the regulation that governs shutoff notices that will impact private owners as well as, tenants. That's a conversation that you should be involved in. And, I think the last thing that I'll say is that there was one more thing I wanted to mention. I'll just leave it there. But, this was the last thing. The governor, again, just signed an executive order about creating Pennsylvania's first housing action plan. And you absolutely need to be a part of that conversation because he needs to understand, being a landlord is a business. And how do we ensure that you all are thriving? So again, you can house the tenants that we essentially serve. So I think those are some immediate action steps that I would encourage HAPCO or you individually, where, you're contacting your elected official, asking the question, how are they involved in that conversation and where are you represented at that table to ensure that you are reflected in whatever plan that he comes up with? Because Out of that plan is going to come legislative recommendations, policy recommendations, and it's also going to drive, when it comes to budget season, where we should be investing our dollar. So I think those are some of the immediate ways that you can, get involved in a conversation, at least at the state level, and, just generally interacting with your local elected official, because again, we're the ones managing, the challenges when it comes to somebody's inability to pay rent or a landlord not being able to remove an individual from their property.
Absolutely. Come find me at City Hall. Paul's got all my contact information. Would love to talk to you more. And I will be here in the spring because I would love to be a part of the landlord-tenant conversation as you guys go forward.
And I know you had to run, so thank you very much for coming. Yes.
Thank you all.
Okay, and we're down to we're going to take one or two quick responses, and then we're going to bring Paul up. So we got a bunch of questions, and we don't have time for a lot of them, so I'll just throw two of them out. Here's one. And again, this may be more city specific, so we'll see if you can answer it or not. As you mentioned, affordable housing is extremely needed in Philadelphia. So why haven't we passed any bills or new laws pertaining to rooming homes? Currently, there are an insurmountable illegal rooming homes in Philly, which brings a plethora of issues. So why not pass a bill that allows legal rooming homes?
I'm all about this, by the way, single room occupancy. I really don't know what to do. I don't want to leave. I'm all about single room occupancy. I've been doing this for long enough. Things were in fashion, went out of fashion, or coming back in fashion again. I really do think we need to have basic structures that lower income people can live in, especially if it's their first starting point to get to some other place. I'm all about it. It's on my list. I promise you I have a list. My staff is dying. I have such a long list, and SROs are on the list. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Sound good.
All right, last question here. And again, I think this is probably a feeling of a lot of folks here. How can rent be capped when the city does not cap expenses like taxes? I think people are talking about assessments of 80% or 150% increase over a 2-year period. I know we touched a little bit about this, what you make versus what you spend kind of. Insurance as well, yeah.
I mean, yeah, let's be clear. I mean, I recognize what Paul is saying, right? There are fears around rent control and what it would do, and understandably, right? I think it's like, but this is the conversation that would need to take place, would need to be a collective one where should we go down this path? It's again a single tool that would need to have exemptions built into it, that would need to have particular, like, should we even adopt it? It's unlikely. I think it would be something that would, also probably I think from our perspective, it's something that I would say, I think it's something that really should be considered Commonwealth wide as well. I think that's a more appropriate place. That's how other states have done it. That's how other places have done it for the most part, not exclusively. So, while I don't know, I think that's a reasonable question, because you're like, how are we able to like actually afford the situation if tax increases get passed on to tenants? How do we do it? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. And so, we should ask it in the context though of like, I think an actual thing to talk through, rather than a kind of in a way that we're not, because right now there isn't a bill to debate. There isn't, there's just, we're not in that context yet.
Yeah, and again, we don't want to pass unfunded mandates with the cost of living continue to go up. And, we cannot have this conversation without reinforcing that wages are not keeping up with the cost of inflation. And no industry should bear the brunt of, people not getting adequately paid, minimum wage being $7.25. I don't know how you're affording anything in the city of Philadelphia at that point. But absent that conversation, I feel like we're kind of chasing the dog with the tail, right? And, I do think as this policy begins to pick up steam in the Commonwealth and in the city, I do think there needs to be a conversation around Maybe how do we incentivize landlords that are, willing to cap their rent, but we're incentivizing them in another way, like potentially targeting the tax abatement specifically for, landlords that are considering not, capping their rent at a certain percentage. So I think that all of these type of conversations need to come into play when we're having this discussion, because again, the cost of living is going up, insurance is going up, taxes are going up. And, we can't saddle one side with the financial burden because wages, again, aren't keeping up. But also, how do we just build in incentives to encourage landlords to, cap the rent where they feel comfortable doing? So I think as we have this conversation, that's why it's important for HAPCO to be at the table, not necessarily immediately just saying no, but potentially looking at models to where landlords that are interested in keeping their units affordable, how do we, build in incentives to help them do that and offset the associated costs that, come with not raising your rents to the point where people can't afford it.
So we're going to have Paul say a few words, but first I want to thank our elected officials here. Councilmember Landau, of course, State Senator Saval, and State Representative Cephas. Thank you so much for your time. I think we're very appreciative.